Dollar. Dirt and money, no soul. Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.
Yup, what's good, original crew, man? We're back today. Yes, we're back, baby. You should smell them onions. Oh, you smell them? You smell them onions?
Funky hands.
Oh, man, I had a burger, y'all. I ain't gonna lie, them Sonic onions be hitting a little different. I'm saying, like, they loud. Even after you wash your hands. Maybe it's on my breath, too.
You didn't brush your teeth.
Not this eye. What you look like that for?
I just look.
I should have, especially eating them. But here nor there. Today's video, man, how the most notorious serial killers got caught. You do the crime, you do the time. Hopefully. Hopefully. We do know some have been able to get away.
Yeah.
And never get caught. But hey, aka Zodiac. You know what I'm saying? But with that being said, before we get into it, make sure you check out the links in the description box.
Down below.
You already know where to go if you want to first support. You got to do it. Check out down below. Also, if you enjoyed today's visuals.
Liking it with a thumbs up.
You know, like high key will be low key weird. That's the high key will low key be weird. It's when people be like, I got my favorite serial killer I like to look into. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like I'm saying, like not people who want to commit crimes, but people who study crime. Yeah. They be like, I got my favorite because he's so like a lot of people like I'm so intrigued by the Zodiac. Mm-hmm. I'm like, why? Mm-hmm. Do you ever think like that?
No. Did I have a favorite? No.
No, I'm saying.
Oh, my bad. I didn't know what you was asking. I was like, you.
Don't worry about it.
Do I have a favorite? No, I don't.
No, I'm not asking if you had a favorite or not.
And no, I've never thought about other people.
No, I'm saying I've heard other people say that. But hey, man, let's go. Let's check it out. Let's see what's about. You ready?
I'm ready.
Let's get it.
How the most notorious serial killers were caught. The year is 1888, and you are located in Whitechapel, England, one of the roughest areas in London's East End. You, like most of the people in your life and in Whitechapel, don't live a life of luxury at all. You struggle to make ends meet, and tonight don't even have the 2 pence to pay for a place to sleep. You used to have a more or less picturesque life until your husband died, and since being on your own, like many women at the time, you resorted to selling your body. Whitechapel wasn't a booming metropolitan area, but it did contain over 62 brothels and over 1,200 prostitutes at the time. So to you, it was a better option than starving. With nowhere else to go, you spent the last few hours at the pub you frequented, and as the pub began to close,
if you was back that time, would you turn to that? Be like, well, that's how most women making their money. Then you know what I'm saying. You gotta get it how you.
I can't say. I mean, in this
at this day and age.
Well, I said in this mind. That's what I was about to say. Just thinking, no, but I don't know what I would have done back then. Because
you do gotta realize, like back then, like women really wasn't able to go out there like today's time. You know what I'm saying? Make a living for themselves. Mm-hmm. Like, the opportunities have changed, you know what I'm saying, for the better. But of that time, that probably was one of the biggest and best ways to make money as a woman was to show yourself.
I just can't imagine, but yeah.
The bartender sensed that you weren't able to pay your bill. Unfortunately, they told you tonight it was on the house, as they knew you had fallen onto some tough times. You stumble out of this bar, beyond drunk, into the dark labyrinth that is the Whitechapel streets, and you begin to take the long and ominous walk home. At this time, it had to be at least 2 or 3 in the morning. The street was so dimly lit and the fog was so thick, you could barely see a person standing a few feet in front of you. Luckily, the labyrinth of small roads was something you were more than familiar with and could do with your eyes closed. And while there was nobody on this street beside yourself, you do notice a figure in the distance. Something that you knew wasn't typically there. It wasn't a lamppost, and it wasn't an animal. As you get closer, you realize that it's a man in a dark trench coat and tall hat. As your drunken thoughts begin to process what you're looking at, you realize that this man was your golden ticket. You had just possibly found a place to stay tonight and even a way to make a few dollars. And as you approach this man, you try to put yourself together and approach him confidently. You walk right up to him and tell him that if he's looking for a good time, you can both go back to his place, and before you could even finish your offer, you slowly notice this man developing an unnatural smirk. And before you're even fully able to process this unnerving smile, you notice something. The reflection of what streetlight was available twinkled off of an object that this man just pulled out of his pocket, although it wasn't a pocket watch or change. This man had just pulled out a 7-inch knife. You instantly realize you need to run away as soon as possible, but your alcohol-induced delayed reaction time prevented you from taking any action, and the only thing you could do was let out a gasp before this man raises the knife and cuts your existence short. Only a few hours later, at the very crack of dawn, a man is slowly venturing down a cobblestone road when he sees something on the sidewalk. He notices a woman on the sidewalk. Although this wasn't the typical Whitechapel homeless person, this was a woman face down, surrounded by blood. This man instantly gets out of his buggy, flips this woman over, only to realize that this woman was not only injured, but brutally murdered. Her neck was stabbed multiple times, and her torso was not only stabbed, but mutilated, with her intestines almost spilling out of her torso. This grim and disgusting discovery was one of the many victims of Jack the Ripper.
Maybe she didn't feel it as much because she was intoxicated. I don't know. Shit, that probably would have woke my ass up.
Baby, that would have.
Damn, that sucks to go out like that. Your husband already dead. You just trying to figure out a way to keep, you know what I'm saying? Keep going in life. And you just, man, that's sad.
And the start of a hunt for truth that would last over 137 years. There's no doubt that Jack the Ripper is one of the most notorious, if not the most notorious serial killer of all time. And of course, we're going to discuss exactly how he was caught. But before we discuss how he was caught, it's important to understand exactly how he wasn't caught so long ago. Obviously, technology wasn't nearly advanced as it was now, but that doesn't mean that crimes weren't solved. And in the case of Jack the Ripper, there was plenty of situations where Jack was very close to being caught and truthfully should have been caught. But we'll get to that. One of the biggest factors that consistently contributed to Jack the Ripper being able to go on for so long without being identified was the location of where he lived. As I mentioned earlier, Whitechapel was a rough area. And although it was tight and crowded, people weren't necessarily paying attention to others as they had enough to focus on. And weird things going on weren't so weird there. People shouting in the streets, people sleeping in the streets, people fighting, people with blood on their clothes, all weren't necessarily uncommon in a place where people were struggling to survive, dealing with disease, violence, and crime, and truthfully just trying to make it to their next meal, let alone their own next day. This gave Jack a lot of leeway to commit some truly horrendous crimes as long as he wasn't directly in anybody's eyesight. Another major contributing factor to the reason why he wasn't caught at the time is because he was only active for a few years. Obviously, being an active serial killer for any period of time is unacceptable. However, if you've seen any of our videos on serial killers, you would know that some killers are active for decades. At the time, it wasn't known how long Jack the Ripper was active, as his identity was unknown. Although, with the information that we have now, we can pinpoint exactly when he stopped killing and why he did too. But before we discuss that, let's first discuss how Jack the Ripper even earned a name as a serial killer. This brings us back to our initial story. A woman being found dead in the Whitechapel streets wasn't common, but wasn't unheard of. But what was unheard of was the sheer level of mutilation that occurred on her body. If this happened only once, there would be no Jack the Ripper. But the volume and consistency of these attacks in such a short amount of time were what fueled the media to create a monster, and one of the first ever famous serial killers. In 1888 alone, there is 5 confirmed killings associated with Jack the Ripper. These 5 victims are known as the canonical 5. And the reason these 5 victims are confirmed to be victims of Jack...
So we got... When he flashed this the first time, I was like, woman, right? But the one in the middle looks like a man. Low key to me. Or is that a woman?
I don't know. Maybe a woman. I was looking at the head on her head.
Is that a head?
I guess something. I don't know.
Because this the hair right here.
Yeah, just like that's her hair, but this is like a little. Or maybe that's her hair, like up in a thing. But she is on the head, and her. I don't know.
I'm just like the one in the middle is the one I'm referring to for anyone wondering.
Jack the Ripper are because they all exhibit trademarks of Jack's method of murder. All of these 5 women were either underprivileged, vulnerable, or had recently fallen onto hard times. And most notably, all of these victims had been murdered and brutally mutilated in such a specific manner. But it wasn't mutilation alone that created Jack the Ripper's signature murder. It was how precise and consistent these mutilations were. Coroners and doctors who inspected these victims once they were found would all remark that whoever had done this must have been experienced with a knife in some way, whether they were a doctor or a butcher or a shoemaker. And during the time that these murders were being investigated in the late 1800s, people in those exact professions, among others, were questioned, as whoever was wielding this knife and mutilating these women was no amateur. And that is beyond unsettling. As these murders were first being discovered, people believed that there was multiple murderers on the loose, as people were being killed more than ever, and these murders were happening so close to each other. And for 2 of the canonical 5 victims of Jack the Ripper, they were even murdered in the same night, 45 minutes apart from each other.
What?
And for that fact, it's reasonable to assume that it might have been multiple people. However, like I mentioned, the sheer consistency of these mutilations made it hard to believe there was more than one person. And with every murder, the newspaper was feeding more and more into the story that a monster was on the loose. Obviously, the newspapers covered these strange murders to keep locals up to date on what was happening, although some speculate that the newspaper was pushing the story for ulterior motives as well. The name Jack the Ripper didn't come from the police or from the public. It was a name that was referenced in a letter that was sent to the media from somebody claiming to be the murderer. That letter, known as the Dear Boss letter, at that time and until today was considered to be a hoax. However, Jack the Ripper must have gotten word about this hoax and decided to confirm things once and for all. As shortly after the Dear Boss letter was submitted to the media, another letter was submitted to the media, known as the From Hell letter. However, this letter was more convincing, as it wasn't just a written statement from somebody claiming that they were the murderer. It was a letter that stated that it was from the murderer and proved it by including half of a kidney in the letter. This half kidney was from one of the victims of Jack the Ripper. And it was at that point when the newspaper and the general public knew that they had one deranged individual on their hands. And it was also that letter that launched Jack the Ripper from local terror to nationwide and later global infamy. Up until last year, that's basically where the story would have ended. Jack
Do you know what he talking about up to last year?
the Ripper was never caught, his identity was never known, and he was somebody that truly terrorized not only his city, but the world. That was until recently. In 2007, a self-proclaimed Jack the Ripper expert named Russell Edwards bought a shawl. But it wasn't any shawl. He wasn't upgrading his wardrobe. He bought a shawl that was believed to have been owned by one of the victims of Jack the Ripper. And not only that, but this shawl was also present at a murder scene and was likely to have DNA on it. And it was this purchase that led to one of the biggest cold cases being solved in almost 150 years. Edwards gave this shawl that he had purchased to a biochemist and tasked him with finding any DNA possible. And that's exactly what he did. And only a few years later, a peer-reviewed article on the DNA analysis that the biochemist was able to find was published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences in 2019. The article that this biochemist published claimed exactly what Russell Edwards had written about all the way back in 2014, that Jack the Ripper was a man named Aaron Kosminski. And while this article has been criticized by scientists for making misassumptions, it does make a pretty compelling case, and at the very least provides a bit more context to the entire Jack the Ripper situation. Aaron Kosminski was born on September 11th, 1865 in Poland, but emigrated to England in the 1880s. He lived in Whitechapel in the East End of London, and his occupation was a barber or hairdresser. That alone is interesting because that confirms that Aaron Kosminski was in the area of the Jack the Ripper killings when they happened, and he also was in a profession that wasn't a stranger to sharp objects. But the information gets deeper. In 1891, Kosminski was institutionalized after he threatened his own sister with a knife. Coincidentally, 1891 was the same year that the suspected Jack the Ripper killings stopped happening. Aaron Kosminski spent the rest of his life institutionalized. And while information about his time in these sanitariums is relatively undocumented, or at least deeply archived, it is documented that he did suffer with severe schizophrenia, leaving him very troubled. Which is also interesting because the things that Jack the Ripper did would, in my opinion, only be the result result of somebody who was truly disturbed. But on top of all of these similarities and coincidences, the biggest claim of the article submitted by the biochemist that Russell Edwards had commissioned was that they claimed to have a DNA link between Aaron Kosminski and DNA found on the shawl of the Jack the Ripper victim. It was actually a 100% DNA match. And that piece of evidence alone was the nail in the coffin, and what sparked a lot of the news you likely saw this year of Jack the Ripper's identity finally being revealed. Over the years, there's been a handful of interesting theories about who Jack the Ripper truly was, but I think the argument that it was Aaron Kosminski is definitely the most compelling. But with that being said, was Jack the Ripper ever truly caught? Well, if Aaron Kosminski was Jack the Ripper, then his identity was revealed, which means something. But also, if it was Aaron Kosminski, that does mean that he was institutionalized in 1891 for the rest of his life. Meaning that he was imprisoned not for his crimes, but for his illness. His illness that likely sparked these crimes. So although you could argue Jack the Ripper was still not 1000% confirmed, I do think that there is a strong argument that Aaron Kosminski is Jack the Ripper. And for that reason, I do believe he was caught. But even if you don't agree, I think this story is extremely interesting. It adds, if nothing else, new layers to one of the coldest cases in serial killer history. But this is only the first case of 3 that we're covering in this video, so let me summarize.
But it does make sense though. If the killings did stop in 1991. But 1891, then it will make sense that because he was incarcerated, just like the case like. Well, I say incarcerated, but it's more institutionalized than incarcerated. But same way with the case we were listening to last night. Wake up!
I am woke.
I was gonna say last year, but last night.
My eyes are open.
Last night.
Yeah.
They believe, can this guy be the guy? But is it a coincidence
Once
that
y'all locked him up, the
killing stopped, and he was like, it just made sense, and
stuff was linked. Like y'all found some
DNA was linked back to this guy, so it will make sense, right?
Yeah, makes sense to me.
But I did hear about that last year. I know. I never told you about it though. That they possibly had identified Jack the Ripper, which is crazy. After over 100 years, that's insane.
How exactly did Jack the Ripper get caught? According to the evidence we have, he got caught because he was consistently killing. He killed in a very methodical way. He confirmed he was a man acting alone in a letter he wrote to the media. And that letter not only confirmed he was one person, but also gave the media ammo to create the spectacle that was Jack the Ripper. And it was this spectacle that got him caught. Because if the media didn't make Jack the Ripper the big boogeyman that he was, there would not be Jack the Ripper historians in the modern day. And if there was no Jack the Ripper in the modern day, there would be no collector buying this old shawl that was at the scene of the crime, and there would be nobody to give it to a biochemist to check it for DNA. And it's interesting to think, if Jack the Ripper never had written that letter, would we be talking about him today? And would he have ever been caught? I guess we'll never know. But let's move on. Saturday, August 24th, 1985. You are a 13-year-old boy, and you had just returned home. 1985. You are a 13-year-old boy, and you had just returned home to Southern California from a road trip with your family. The road trip was fun, but the entire time there was an eerie undertone, as your parents and the family you had been visiting out of town were all focused on one subject: the serial killer that had been on the loose in Southern California. You didn't know much of the situation, and truthfully, you weren't too interested, but you overheard your parents talking about some sort of Nightstalker. And between overhearing your parents and news coverage, it was hard not to have some sort of context about what was going on. And from what you understood, there was this crazy man on the loose who at this point had killed 13 innocent people, and was still not only not caught, but not even identified. This to you was scary, but what was about to happen on this fateful night was going to be a lot scarier. You return home from your family vacation later in the night, and you spent the evening unpacking, something that you delayed doing because you were watching your favorite VHS. It was a movie known as Back to the Future, and it only came out a month prior. And watching this movie kept you up later than usual, and this movie left you excited and unable to sleep, which is why you were up at midnight, which for you was later than usual. The rest of your family was sleeping, so you made sure to be quiet and keep keep to yourself. It was until you realized that you left your favorite pillow in the family RV, and you weren't going to bed without it, so you had to quietly sneak out to it to get it. Obviously, without waking your parents. You tiptoe outside, and once you make it into the yard, you hear something. Something that sounds like footsteps, but you're not alarmed. You have a large backyard that's unfenced that backs onto a hill, and seeing possums, raccoons, and even deer weren't necessarily uncommon. And you were curious to see what was making all of this noise. You don't see any animal or anything at all, and figure whatever little critter it was must have scurried away. And since you're outside, you figured, why not go to the garage and work on your bike a little bit? Back to the Future got you.
How old is this boy?
It didn't say.
He said 13, didn't
Oh, yeah, 13. Yeah, he 13. He did say. Girl, forget the quiz.
I ain't gonna hold you back in the day. You know what I'm saying? Your entertainment was a VHS tape or doing something productive. That was the entertainment. You know what I'm saying? We ain't have video games and what.
I said that's fine and dandy. I'm in the house.
I'm saying sometimes you would stay up late when you stayed up late. Maybe you wanted to watch BET
staying
Uncut.
up late is not.
BET Uncut. Ooh, let me see some booty.
The staying up late is not the issue. It's the sneaking outside to go get a pillow, going to see what the noise is, working on your bike.
So if I went outside. I went outside. Now at times I would be outside and beyond the street lights, but also it's the summertime. I think the latest I used to stay out like that time was like 10, 11 o'clock. You know
and I don't know, like as a child, like back then. Well, I mean,
but I'll call my mom and be like, hey, I'm on the way because I was around the corner and I'll be riding my bike back to the house.
Yeah, I don't know, like back like
85.
I mean, I wasn't born, wasn't thought of, but
Nah,
I wasn't thought of in 85, boy. But yeah, I don't know.
One of y'all was.
Yeah, my sister. And this was what
she might thought about naming your sister's.
Anyway, but I kind of would have been a little scared just knowing that, like, overhearing my parents and stuff talking, knowing that someone is on the loose and been identified.
That's true.
That would have creeped me out a little bit. I was like, man, that pillow can wait till in the morning. But
that's true.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah.
You inspired to tinker around, and maybe you were about to build the first time-traveling bike. And it was shortly into this tinkering session that you once again heard footsteps. But this time it was different. There was no suspicion of this being an animal. You were certain that you were hearing a person walking around the property. Your biggest fear was that your dad was coming out to see what you were up to, but what was actually outside was much more terrifying. It only took a few moments for you to realize that whoever was outside wasn't your dad, because they didn't enter the garage and they didn't say anything. You had an odd feeling and decided to hide behind the car and realize
he left the door unlocked because that's the only way back in the house.
That you couldn't be here. You bolted out of the garage directly into the house. And as soon as you got into the house, you looked out the window to see exactly what was outside. And that's when you see a man walking around your home. You see this man start to walk away. And before he fully leaves your property, you want to get one last look to see if you know who this man could be and what he was doing there. And as you run from your bedroom out through the kitchen to the garage, your dad stops you in the kitchen and asks you, what are you doing? Why are you up at this hour? Hastily, you tell your dad that there's a man in the yard and you need to see who he is and what he's doing now. And after explaining this entire situation in only a matter of seconds, you shove your dad out of the way and run into the yard. When you catch a glimpse of a figure wearing a baseball cap, a jacket, and blue jeans. And although you can't identify this figure, you see them get into an orange Toyota. An orange Toyota hatchback with a chrome roof rack.
That is so precise. And if I'm be committing crimes, I'm not finna be in a fucking orange Toyota with a chrome roof rack. You stick out like a sore thumb. Right? Oh, hold on. Like this. Yeah, this motherfucker.
Yeah.
As this man got into his car, you run into the road to follow him. And although his car is facing the opposite direction...
You 13 doing all this?
Some be a brave child.
Put 1985. Or 1980 something.
1985.
82. Where you?
1982.
Just say 85.
Okay, I say 85. 1985.
Still ain't doing that.
It ain't pulling it up.
To you, he doesn't just drive off. He does a U-turn in the middle of the road to go the opposite direction. And this gives you the opportunity to see this man's face. The man drove off. and you, confused, go back inside and explain everything to your dad. Concerned, your dad already had the police called, and rather swiftly, the police were at the door taking a written statement. But it was only an hour later when the police called back to get even more information. And then a few hours later, at 6 in the morning, the police once again returned for more information. And the reason why the police returned at 6 in the morning was because only a mile and a half away from your home, there was another mysterious murder. And it happened only shortly after your initial report was made. And it was at that point when everything...
Also, he was leaving your crib to go commit the murder.
I wonder, yeah.
I was trying to hear the times.
Oh.
So that, because...
and explain everything to your dad. Concerned, your dad already had the police called, and rather swiftly, the police were at the door taking a written statement. But it was only an hour later when the police called back to get even more information. And then a few hours later, at 6 in the morning, the police once again returned for more information. And the reason why the police returned at 6 in the morning was because only a mile and a half away from your home, there was another mysterious...
Because I'm trying to think, could a mile and a half where he walked there that night? A mile and a half away, would you walk and would you risk parking your car in the neighborhood in the middle of the night just to walk a mile and a half away to commit a murder and come back? You know, would you risk that?
Is it really a risk? Because of the time, you expecting no one to really see you for real. We did see that.
But neighbors, you know, some people have neighborhood watch. Some people have nosy neighbors that, hey, it's a suspicious car parked on the side of the street. You never know. Especially a bright orange car.
You never know, but that's the thing. Leaving it somewhere else opposed to where you're going to commit the crime at.
About a mile and a half. It ain't that far, especially if you're in shape. You can just run. Mm-hmm. But also, I might be exhausted of energy by the time. It's a good escape plan because if I can get back to the car, it's a good escape. But if I can't, I'm, a mile and a half away, that's fucked. But a mile and a half ain't that far. That's like somebody parked right here and our visitors. Oh, like the dude the other day. Remember I told you the dude, that was like a mile and a half. There's a guy parked. I'm walking the dog. He's all the way back in the others. And that's about a mile and a half.
It's not far.
Yeah, it's not
actually
far.
Nothing.
It's not. Yeah. And he got back. He walked, got in the car, drove off fast as hell. I'm like, damn. Well, I was on the phone. I'm like, damn. I'm like, bro came. And he walked. I'm like, he already gone. I'm like, man, I know.
What you say he was doing?
Huh?
That's what you say he was doing.
I say he probably was cheating. But thinking about it like this, you never know. He might have went over there and committed. But because the way he walked, he didn't walk in a direction like he walked. And I'm thinking he just walked and get some exercise.
You know, people be weird.
He had a hood on, y'all, head low, and I'm like, he was a little scared.
He probably was watching us, like trying to see something.
Cause it was early in the morning. Yeah. Cause that day I went out early, and normally my walk be about a half a mile. Yeah. And so me coming back home, I'm like, damn, he walking fast as hell. Cause I was like, he went the opposite way, but we ended up going on the opposite sides. And he walked past, and I'm like, all right, I'm finna catch up with him. But he gone. So I'm like, oh, he already in the car. So he got in the car. He pulled back. I'm like, yeah.
Murder. And it happened only shortly after your initial report was made. And it was at that point when everything had clicked. Initially, you and your parents assumed that there must have been some sort of potential burglar lurking in the yard that was scared away when he saw that people were up. But once the police had confirmed that there was a murder only a mile from your home, they suspected that you didn't find a burglar, but that you likely came face to face with Richard Ramirez, the Nightstalker. 2 days later, on August 27th, 1985, the police identified a vehicle that matched the description that you had given them. It was an orange Toyota hatchback with a chrome roof rack parked on the side of the road. The police had this car towed and impounded, likely to provoke the owner to show up to reclaim it and then to be investigated. When the police towed this car, they asked you, is this the car that you saw that night? and you confirmed it. And the reason why they towed this car initially is because on the night when they took their official statement, you told them that you saw this exact car. And you even remembered the first few digits of the license plate. This alone was a huge breakthrough in the case, and was one of the major turning points that got Richard Ramirez caught. Once the vehicle was confirmed to be the one that they saw that night, police investigated the entire vehicle, finding very little evidence. That was until they found a single fingerprint on the driver's side mirror, a fingerprint that linked the driver of the vehicle to Richard Ramirez. And at that point, a photo and name was submitted to the public as a person of interest. And it was at that point when the floodgates on this case burst open. One day after the name and photo were submitted to the public, on August 31st, 1985, Richard Ramirez was trying to steal a vehicle. And while attempting to steal this vehicle, an altercation broke out. And this altercation got the attention of neighbors. And although Ramirez was able to get car keys from a woman that he had just assaulted, before he could drive away with his vehicle he had attempted to steal, a neighbor had pulled Ramirez out of the vehicle, and other neighbors at this point had also approached the vehicle and began to beat and restrain Ramirez. The police were called, showed up, and arrested the man. And 1 week later, the police called you one final time to identify the person you saw that night in a lineup. You looked at 5 criminals standing beside each other, and you instantly recognized the man who you saw in your backyard. You tell the police that that was the man you saw that night, and it was your testimony that led to the Nightstalker being caught.
That's fucking insane,
the boy
bro.
in the story that identified Ramirez is known as James Ramiro, and he is true.
Well, good thing he was up being
I was gonna let him finish. A good thing he was up watching Back to the Future, wanting his pillow, went to work on that bike. See, I was about to be like, because I thought something else. So I was like, Lord, please.
Good thing he was up working on his bike, being a fidgety ass kid.
We about to catch
Truly one brave young man. Not even a young man. He's like 13. He's literally a boy, like a child. And perhaps him being so naive allowed him to have the confidence and the blissful ignorance to follow a mysterious man into your backyard.
Very much so ignorant.
As a grown man, I wouldn't do that alone, even if I was armed. Regardless, James being up late that night and deciding to follow this man to the yard ultimately led to the downfall of one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, and undoubtedly saved the lives of innocent people that Richard Ramirez would have victimized.
What you first say?
I'm about to say, like, his face, you like, if I see his face, you're not gonna forget it. Like, just the way his face is, like,
you know what's so
his
crazy?
Cheekbones and, like, just the structure of his face. That's not a face you forget.
You know what's so crazy? If he wasn't so fucked up in the head, I can see him actually being a model. Because he has such a, like, image, and he was slender, such a distinct facial, like, you can literally chop his hair, clean him up, and that's a model. Is it not? Like you really look at him, they like, yo, we can do something with him. You groom his hair, cut it, like, or even style that. All is because his mindset, because his cheekbones, jawline, and all that. They were like, man, we can put you in some modeling classes. He could have been a fucking millionaire.
American history, and undoubtedly saved the lives of innocent people that Richard Ramirez would have victimized next. On September 20th, 1989, Richard Ramirez was convicted of all charges and was sentenced to death. His convictions specifically were 12 counts of first-degree murder, 11 counts of second-degree murder, and 14 counts of first-degree burglary. And although he was on death row, he died on June 7th, 2013, at the age of 53 of lymphoma. I think the story kind of tells itself here. James was an absolute legend of a boy, and Ramirez was a troubled excuse for a man. And although Ramirez was unfortunately able to victimize so many innocent people, justice was at least eventually served, largely in part to James. So exactly how did the Nightstalker get caught? Well, he messed with the wrong boy, staying up past his bedtime. The year is 1998. You live in a small town in England known as Hyde, and you have recently been going through some distressing times with your family. Your father-in-law has been experiencing very odd medical symptoms, and it's believed that he may have cancer. Obviously, wanting the best, you and your family decide to go to one of the most respected and well-known doctors in the entire city of Hyde, a man named Harold Shipman. Your father-in-law gets an examination, and a few days later, you call him to follow up on the prognosis. The doctor on the phone rather firmly responds, "I wouldn't buy him any Easter eggs," which was a harsh way of delivering news that someone was going to die soon. Almost eerie, as Easter was only 2 weeks away. Due to the shock of the news you've just received, you appreciate him telling you the truth, and you hang up the phone and begin talking to your family. Your family took this news a little bit softer, as they believed that he was being metaphorical and almost joking, saying that the end was soon, but there was no way that it could have been this soon, right? Regardless, your family started to make the appropriate plans. And almost on cue, only 4 days later after that phone call, even earlier than the doctor had claimed, your father-in-law had passed away. The truth behind his death was a lot more disturbing than simply him succumbing to the disease he had. You meet with the doctor after your father-in-law's passing to discuss if anything could have been done and what really happened and why this was so sudden. And the doctor, rather sternly yet calmly and somewhat compassionately, described to you that sometimes things happen so fast, and realistically in situations with terminal illness, there's not much you can do. This doctor tells you that an autopsy isn't required and that you should plan the funeral as soon as possible to begin the grieving process. And like many others before you, you take his advice and opt to not have an autopsy. This
That's
practice was
weird.
common for Harold Shipman, as he not only advocated for all of his patients who had family members who passed away to not only not get an autopsy, but also to get a
Weird.
cremation as fast as possible. But as you likely already know,
Cremation?
these recommendations
Weird.
weren't coming from a place of compassion, but instead out of a place of self-preservation. And the reason why I say this is because Harold Shipman was actively killing his patients. He targeted typically elderly women and sometimes elderly men too, and for the most part victimized people who were already terminally ill and unlikely to be suspected of accidental or intentional death. Harold was a troubled individual, there was no doubt about it. His mother passed away at a young age, and he struggled with drug abuse
That's
in
no
his early
excuse,
career as a
though.
doctor, and was even admitted to a facility. However, it wasn't put on his record, and he was only given a warning. This allowed him to continue practicing and even to get his own private practice, which may sound like a fortunate second chance, although that optimism slips away when you realize what happened within his private practice. Harold was no longer addicted to heroin, but he was seemingly addicted to giving his target patients a lethal dose of diamorphine, the same drug that was given to his mother when she was dying. Harold Shipman was suspected of killing his victims as early as 1975, and it wasn't until 1998 when suspicions of foul play began to become overwhelming. As in small communities, word spreads quickly, and it was at that point when Harold Shipman was investigated. Upon investigation, it was confirmed that Harold Shipman's mortality rate as a doctor was 10 times above the average. Yet, when the health authority investigated all of the paperwork associated with these patients and their deaths, they found no irregularities, which at the time lowered suspicion. But as we know now, these papers were actually forged to fit the stories that he was spinning. And while the health authority was investigating the patients, the Greater Manchester Police were investigating Shipman, and unfortunately also failed, as they weren't even able to find his criminal history or the time he spent in an institution for his drug abuse. What this essentially means is that this first investigation into Harold Shipman almost cleared his name. It didn't clear suspicions, but legally speaking, Harold was doing nothing wrong. He was a standard doctor who unfortunately had some unlucky clients. But this story didn't last for long. Only a few months later, on June 24th, 1998, Harold made a very distinct choice that led directly to him being caught. Harold Shipman was at the home of one of his patients, a woman named Kathleen Grundy. This woman was 81 years old and described as being in great health. She had an appointment with Shipman at her home to have a routine
go.
blood test, although what she got instead was a lethal dose of diamorphine. As per his standard practice, he quickly wrote her death certificate and stated her cause of death as old age and suggested she be cremated immediately. But that wasn't the only document he forged. Somewhat unusually, he also forged a will, and it was Kathleen's will, giving all of her worldly
Oh, you
possessions to her
stupid.
doctor, Harold Shipman. And it was this move
Wow.
specifically that raised more than a few red flags. Kathleen
you
was a
dumb
former
dumb.
mayor of Hyde, and for that reason was a notable person in the community, and her death was very upsetting to many, particularly her family, who were shocked not only that their healthy mother and grandmother passed away, but also that she'd left all of her money to her doctor. And with that, they began investigating Harold themselves, when they quickly
Boring.
realized that he was behind not only the forgery, but also the death. The family was able to confirm that Harold's fingerprints were on the will that he forged, and that the will was even typed on his typewriter that was missing a key, which undoubtedly confirmed that he was the one who wrote it.
Boy,
And his
you
family
stupid.
somehow was able to find out about Harold's past when the police weren't able to, which at the very least is odd and borderline
It's
negligent
odd.
by the police. Kathleen's family
Facts.
demanded that her body be autopsied, and it was during that autopsy when it was found that she had a lethal dose of diamorphine in her muscle tissue, and Harold Shipman was arrested for the murder of Kathleen Grundy.
Good.
Once he was arrested, the family of 11 other victims who had their family member buried and not cremated opted to have their family members' bodies examined by the police. And these examinations also showed that these 11 other patients of Harold Shipman were also victims of his. And it was at this time that Harold Shipman was convicted of 15 murders from 1995 to 1998. Although in the investigations that followed his initial conviction,
15 from 95 to 98.
you know it's more.
How many people did you really kill, my brother?
Because if they
Well,
feel
not
like
my
he's,
brother.
if they feel like he started what
75.
Come
Boy,
on,
in that
that's
short
so
amount of time,
many.
3 years, 15
So
murders.
many more.
So damn, let's do the math. Let's try to. Ooh, we can't even do that
I
math.
can't even.
Damn.
But it's alive.
So hold on. So we got. I'm gonna try to do some now. Let me see where the calculator at.
I mean, I guess you'll have to know how many patients he had.
No, I'm gonna just do an average sum.
Okay.
15 divided by 3. So that's 5 murders per year. So we got times 23. At average, if we doing at least 5 a year, at average, this the amount. 115.
That's sad, bro.
And that's a give or take number, but that's ballpark. We don't know if he slowed down at one point. We don't know if he sped up at one point.
Yeah.
We don't know if he stayed consistent, but that's a lot if that's anywhere near that. Because 15 in 3 years, that's 5 a year.
Conviction. There is over 284 confirmed killings
Oh,
by
there you go.
God damn.
Give it some time. They gonna tell you the number. Well, that was your estimate, 115. You said it could be more, and it was more. That is crazy.
I want
And just
nowhere
imagine-
near.
What and is that like?
That's double than what I got. Cause if you double what I got at 115, that ain't number 230.
My goodness.
Damn. I mean, what?
that followed his initial conviction, there is over 284 confirmed killings by Harold Shipman, and there are even more that are unconfirmed but likely possible.
See,
Just
look.
let that sink in. He was only convicted of 15 murders, but he was confirmed to have killed at least 284 of his patients, likely from the years of 1975 to 1998. Harold received life in prison, although only a few years into his sentence, he ended his own life on January 13th, 2004 at the age of 57. Shipman never gave any motive for his murders and never admitted to any of it. These are just 3 cases of how some of the most infamous serial killers were caught. And if you are interested in hearing more, unfortunately, there is more stories to tell. Unfortunate because these stories involve real victims, and I try to be as respectful as possible of that fact. And with that being said, if you guys would like to hear more stories of how some of the most infamous and notorious serial killers were caught, please leave a like or leave a comment below letting me know you want to see more. And if you haven't seen it yet, check out the video on screen right now. It's another video.
Most definitely. I would like to see more, because it's just like, what? See,
I
that's
never
insane.
heard
That last one?
the last one, yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
So, wow, bro. And then you just take your own life, huh? All right.
Crazy insane, man.
Yep.
Hey, man, y'all spam us up in the comments. Y'all let us know y'all thoughts about it for us in the comment section down below. But until next time, y'all know how it go, man. I do go by the name DJ New Kid. This is
Sierra Nicole.
We Are.
Kid and
We
C.
Out.
Ain't no time to kick it, got a stack of flip for my folks. Dollar, 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 dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar, 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 dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.